Greetings, chess fans. My name is Arturs Neiksans. I'm the leading Latvian chess grandmaster, and literally 3 minutes ago, I finished my commentary of the World Championship match, the Liren against Dommaraju Gukesh. Since earlier in the morning, I was unexpectedly invited by chess.com to do the commentary together with Anish Giri and John Sargent. It was fantastic. So let's walk through the critical phases of the game and see what happened in this critical game 9. So Gukesh was playing with the white perspective. He opened up with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and as Anish Giri was suggesting before the game had even started, this might be a good idea to see some Catalan. And indeed, this is what we got because g3 was on the board. So this move order is probably an idea to avoid opting for a Queen's Indian setup, which is a favorite weapon of Richard Rappert. That's why, for example, here if you play knight f3, black might still play b6, bishop b7, and whatever, bishop b4 or bishop b7, all of these lines are really tricky. And with this move g3, you basically make sure it doesn't happen. Now, there is a downside. Black could play c5 and play the modern Benoni, where the g3 setup is not really the best that white can do, but still, it's Benoni, and for the World Championship match, the position is great for white. So g3 was played, and Ding included bishop b4 check and bishop e7, and this idea is that in some lines, white's bishop on d2 is misplaced because, as seen a couple of moves later here, white very often wants to play b3 and bishop on b2, and the bishop on d2 is not really that well positioned. Also, there's an extra idea at some point for black to play knight e4, threaten to kill white's ducks with bishop, and then transpose the stonewall setup. So the game progressed with c6, queen c2, and knight e7, rook d1, b6, and here bishop c3. Now, my partner in the commentary, Anish Giri, he said that this is a move he has played himself quite recently against Hans Niemann. The idea is to play knight e2 and play e4, essentially the same setup that white typically tries to play b3 and bishop b2, but he said that he was not really impressed with this choice because, according to his analysis, there's nothing really special about white's position here. So now Dink had choice to play either bishop b7 or bishop a6. Knight e4 is also something that Giri mentioned here, trying to switch at some point for the stonewall position, but Ding played solid bishop b7, knight e2, and queen c7. The point here is that white cannot easily find a way to get the advantage, because if he plays e4, which is the common idea in these positions, black is simply going to trade a couple of times on e4, proceed with c5, open up the light square bishop on b7, and if white plays d5 and hopes for some sort of a kingside attack, there might be some problems with knight f6, even though, by the way, the engine says all of this is perfectly stable for white. Now, instead here, Gukesh opted for rook c1, and this basically meant that he doesn't mind that c5 is going to happen at some point, because typical for the Catalan positions, even though if you get a symmetrical pawn structure in the middle game, white always is pressing. So here, Ding played rook d8, which was a rather unexpected move for Gukesh. So far, the players were following a game of Erwin Lamy playing with the white color against another strong grandmaster a couple of years ago in Bundesliga, and that game continued with rook c8. Now, rook d8 leads to slightly different setup. Black wants to play rook c8 and queen b8. Apparently here, Gukesh was caught off guard. So he played e4, which is a pretty common idea in these positions. I mean, you want to play c5 on stop black from pushing c5 himself. So here, c5, Ding decided immediately to fire up the center. And maybe here was an interesting opportunity for Gukesh to try to complicate the game with d takes, b takes, and play b5. But again, this bears some risk that eventually Gukesh might find himself in a worse position. So this is not really a position to play without any risk. That's why here Gukesh played b takes on c5 and queen b2. During the commentary, I was suggesting maybe it made more sense to play queen b2 instead, try to open up this file, but then again, black concretely can take on b4, captures here, and play rook c8. So it is not in time to take on d5 because the rook on c1 is under attack. Black plays queen b8 and reach some sort of a semi-Tarrasch position. So that's why Gukesh included c takes, b takes, and queen b2 here. Now that there's no c takes on b4, he was hoping there's going to be some pressure, like rook b8, queen a1. The black queen on c7 feels awkward. Now, black has many moves, so here Ding made the most human move in knight b6, immediately challenging white's center. Bishop a5 was played. After d takes on c4, knight takes on c4, we are seeing some trades. So here, Ding opted for the safe move, bishop takes on f3. During the commentary, we're discussing that knight takes on c4 probably makes sense because bishop on a5 now is hit, but this leads to a forcing sequence. After rook takes on c4, queen takes on a5, queen takes on b7, maybe black has some problems. So the bishop on e7 is hit, and as in the post-game press conference, Ding said he was considering bishop f8, but now after knight e5, he has major problems to defend pawn on f7. Also, he said he considered king f8. Again, white plays knight e5, there's all kinds of threats, so he simply dropped the line. But actually here he could have equalized the game right away with knight e7, d takes on c5 here, and black actively holds on with a simple move like e8, the pawn on c4 falls, and it's just equal. Now instead here Ding opted for bishop takes on f3, and the point here is that white has to include the capture on b6 because now this idea no longer works. Knight takes on c4, and white would simply lose the game because bishop takes on c7, knight e1, followed by bishop d8. Black just plays rook takes on d8 and gets two minor pieces rook. So that's why here bishop takes on b6 was included, takes on f3, hitting the rook here on a8 and rook a6. Now, this position feels that if somebody has the advantage, it's Gukesh. But how to capitalize on it? Because we have obstacle bishops on the board and black's game is pretty simple. So as in the press conference, it was revealed by the young Indian star, he was considering moves like knight e5 or e3, but he did not really see any concrete way. And this indeed is also the top choice of an engine. During the commentary, I was considering if there might be a way for Gukesh try to get the pawn on d5, like knight e3, d5, knight takes on d5, trying to follow a game I have shown many times to my students, meaning Levon Aronian with the white color against Vasily Ivanchuk. I really don't remember which tournament, but Aronian in the white color won this very nice queen endgame with obstacle of bishop siege, which seemed to be like a dead draw. Now instead here, Gukesh played queen b5, which is simply based on miscalculation. So he immediately tried to win the pawn on b6, which is a nice idea, but now after knight takes on b6, suddenly comes the shocking move, queen a7, and about here, Gukesh realized he cannot win the pawn on c5. I mean, there's always rook a5 move. So here he spent a lot of time. As you can see, he had about 15-minute lead on the clock, and I think that he basically rushed with his choice. Queen b5, as you see, he spent 30 minutes, and he could have used his time a bit better and tried to find out how to capitalize on the advantage. Now, this was already almost impossible to get it done. The point here, for example, so here queen b1 was played by Gukesh. If he had played d takes on c5, black can always take on d1 and play rook a5. And even though you get a feeling that black has some back rank issues, white is in no position to exploit the black always covers all the critical squares. So that's why here queen b1 was a pretty nice idea. The point here, after rook b8, d takes on c5, rook a6 was played by Ding, and there was the final chance for Gukesh to try to trap his opponent. He played queen b5, hoping that black at some point is going to play bishop c5 and rook b6. The point here is that suddenly after rook a1, the queen on a7 is trapped as there's no way to go. That's it. But actually here, this is still a draw because, of course, black can always play queen b6. There's exactly one check in the last rank, but knight e8 is just secure, and the game is leading to a draw. So Gukesh was thinking about his choices here, and it seemed that we were about to get a quick draw because Gukesh had spent all of his extra time he had on the clock. So basically, for the first time in this game, he was behind on the clock. Basically, what you need is to reach move 40 and agree to a draw. So this is move 28. Now something started to happen. Suddenly, Ding became very active. Gukesh was playing a bit careless. Maybe he felt that this position is drawing no matter what he does. Here he played this move f4, which maybe he would regret a bit later. The point here is, even though he is liquidating, suddenly black has some active ideas like knight c5 and asking white some unpleasant questions. So again, here Gukesh spends some time. He played king f2, knight c5 and king e3. But now it's becoming clear that if somebody is playing this, at least for something, it's only the world champion Ding Liren. So rook c2 was played, pawn on h3 is a weakness, followed by king f3, rook d2, rook a3, and now the big question is how to make a progress. So here, Ding started king g6, rook b3, essentially Gukesh can't do nothing, he just has to stand still because king e3 drops the pawn on h3. I was, to be honest, quite disappointed to see that Ding did not try this idea of f5. Now, this is something we're discussing with the niche during the postgame, during the tournament commentary. The point here is that black wants to play h4, rook h2, and try to win the pawn on h3. And it's not so simple. For example, king g3, there might be positions, for example, rook e2, you want to go here. If you are careless, you might wind up yourself in this endgame where this king goes around and suddenly black starts to play for the win because the white king can go to f2. This pawn is dropping. Also, rook g3 check, king h2, rook f3 is a big threat. Let me show it to you on the board. You see, suddenly white is very, very shaky to stay in the game. And of course, Ding wouldn't have to go here. For example, after king g6, as soon as he plays f5, maybe white can play h4, but this gives some extra ideas for white, like let's say here, rook goes here, and let's say if white activates the pieces, suddenly you can ask white some questions. There's rook g4 incoming, which pawn do you give up? You play king f3, there's rook g4, and of course I see the engine says this is a dead draw, but at least this would have been a longer fight. Probably the world champion didn't really believe that this is playable, and instead, after some thought, he played f6, he played king f5, essentially liquidating into a draw. F takes on e5, intermezzo check on d3. Now here Gukesh gave up the pawn here on the h file, and this is just a basic draw that players found a way to liquidate with each try board. So what does it mean for the match? It means that the score remains tied. 4.5 points, and the players already have made, how many draws is it? 6 draws in a row. But it feels at some point this drawing cycle will end, and one of the players should win. With every single game that Ding stands his ground, I think his chances actually increase. So the match remains level. Players already getting asked questions in the press conference. Who might be the favorite in the tiebreaks? We are going to see. We have still plenty of classical games to be played. Tomorrow, there's a rest day. So the players are going to come back on Saturday with game 10 and the next series of 3 games. So, dear viewers, write your thoughts. What do you think about this game? Were you following the commentary live? What do you think about my commentary with Anish and John? And if you have any questions or insights, or what was your feeling about the game, please write it. Very curious to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you like my recap, do not forget to press like and also subscribe to my channel, as I will be making more daily videos and grow as a content creator. Thank you for watching. I'm signing off.